Okay. Welcome everyone to April. We are in Toronto, hopefully in the last days of winter, and which is very exciting to me. And so I'm very pleased this month to be joined by Adriana. I'll introduce her in a moment. Actually, I'll let her introduce herself because she'll do a much better job. But before that, I just want to introduce the meetup for anyone who hasn't joined us. Before I get to sponsors, if you're not on Slack, we have a pretty vibrant Slack community that is constantly talking about anything and everything DevOps. There's a lot of smart folks in there. So if you've got challenges, questions, if you're hiring, if you're looking to maybe switch organizations, check that out. Ask something in the chat and leverage the community, because that's what it's there for. And there's a group of diehards in there that is just like ready to help and ready to chat all the time, which is awesome. We still have DevOps TO on Twitter, which just seems less and less relevant all the time, but while it's there, I think we do publish. Sebastian, who's on the call, does handle all the kind of notices and posts to social media, so you can keep track of upcoming events if you're not subscribed to anything on Meetup, or if you just find spam annoying and you'd rather spend time on Twitter. We are lucky enough to be sponsored by a couple of excellent organizations. One of them is CloudBees, which you should be familiar with if you are in the DevOps space. They are a full service end-to-end product suite for everything continuous delivery. And JFrog as well, very big in the industry, very large impact in CI/CD, specifically specializing in artifacts, artifact management. So check them out if you are looking for options, ideas, even to just have a chat with really smart folks. And feel free to reach out to me if you're looking for a contact or a warm introduction to someone. With that, I will hand off to Adriana. Adriana and I, actually, we met a long time ago at a Ryerson event where we were talking about DevOps, and I was incredibly impressed by her presentation. And we kept in touch through, she's been working in the observability space for ages. And I think is, one of the people in Toronto that I look to for leadership in the space. So very pleased to have her presenting on observability. And I will hand it off to you, Adriana. You can run this however you like, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Right. Okay, just making sure that the thing that is supposed to be sharing is sharing. Cool.
Looks good.
All right. Well, hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today and spending part of your evening here for my talk on observability anti-patterns. I'm very excited to be here. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about me. My name is Adriana Villela, and I love solving hard problems, whether it is at my day job as a senior developer advocate at Lightstep or on a rock wall, which is where you'll find me blowing off steam when I'm not at work. I'm also a HashiCorp Ambassador, a CNCF Ambassador, co-host of the On Call Me Maybe podcast, and I've actually been doing computer things for the last 30 plus years, including getting my start in programming at the age of 10 with BASIC. So now I have dated myself. So now that we've gotten all the pleasantries out of the way, let us get started. So have you ever been at a place that claims to be all in on observability, only for you to realize that they're not actually really following observability practices? Now, I've been in this space for long enough to witness my fair share of anti-patterns, and I'll be calling these out in the hopes that you can bring these learnings back to your respective organizations, whether you're an executive or an individual contributor. Now, before I start talking about observability anti-patterns, though, I want to take a brief little detour to set the stage and define a few key terms. And I know everyone wants to get to the meaty bits, but I promise that this detour is going to help with our narrative. So I'll be defining the following. I'll be talking about what is observability, what is OpenTelemetry, and what are service level objectives. So we'll start by defining observability, and there is no better way than to do that with a little story. So picture this. We've got Sandy's company. They have a high-profile flagship application, and the development team has deployed a microservice to prod. A few hours later, the company's Twitter feed is flooded with angry tweets, and who doesn't love angry tweets from users? And of course, the anger spreads to Facebook. The app is acting weird. No one's seen this issue before. Surprise, surprise. None of the usual alerts get triggered, so double extra bonus there. Now, Sandy is the one who's on call and therefore gets paged to look into the issue, and Sandy starts troubleshooting. And to troubleshoot, Sandy does what most of us would probably think of doing, which is looking at logs. Sandy SSHs into various machines to look at the logs, application logs, database logs, app server logs, thingamawatchet logs. If it has a log, Sandy wants to look at it. Anything that'll give them some inkling as to what the hell is going on. So of course, it takes a couple of grueling hours. They're stressful, of course, because management's breathing down their neck, because what wouldn't be complete than an incident with angry executives who are saying, is it fixed yet? Now, Sandy finally connects the dots together to figure out the underlying problem. And the thing is, these types of things keep happening. It's burning them out. It's burning their team out. Sandy is honestly too old to be dealing with all of this shit. It sucks. It's happened to me before. I'm sure it has happened to many of you before. It is stressful. It is annoying. Nobody wants to deal with this. So the question is, what could have been done better? And if you're guessing observability, then you are completely right. And it brings us to our definition of observability, which observability, or O11Y, or OLLY for short, lets us understand a system from the outside by letting us ask questions without knowing the inner workings of that system. Now, what does that actually translate to? It means that even though you don't understand all the nitty-gritty crap underlying business logic of the system emits enough information for you to follow the breadcrumbs to ultimately answer the question, why is this happening? Which is all well and good, but why should you care about observability? Well, because first of all, it allows you to troubleshoot those gnarly issues easily, even if you're not familiar with the code base, which means you don't always have to keep relying on super senior engineers to troubleshoot for you. Hooray. It also allows you to answer questions about production systems, even when you don't know what that question is ahead of time. So it helps you deal with novel problems. And finally, it allows you to identify issues in production before your users start screaming at you on social media, because who doesn't like the sound of angry tweets and Facebook posts? I certainly don't. Now, we cannot talk about observability and not talk about APM. Some of you may already be familiar with APM. For those who aren't, stands for Application Performance Monitoring, or referred to as monitoring. Now, back in the days of monoliths, monitoring tools were used to monitor system health, and they did a pretty decent job of it, since interactions within the monolith were extremely predictable. You could get away with setting up a bunch of dashboards and alerts, and boom, you'd be all set. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we live in a microservices world. So we have to contend with the fact that with microservices in the picture, you ended up with a bunch of services interacting with each other in sometimes extremely unpredictable ways. So for example, you add an item to a shopping cart, there are tons of things that happen in the back end that involve services calling each other, services making database calls. So how do you make sense of all this? And how can you tell if there's any funny business happening with your services or across your services? And of course, the answer is with observability. And for extra bonus points, observability is not only suited for microservices, it is also suited for monoliths. So yay. So we understand the basics of observability. Now let's talk a little bit about OpenTelemetry. Now, OpenTelemetry is important to our narrative because with all this talk about observability, we need a way for our systems to emit information to enable our engineers to follow the breadcrumbs to answer the question, why is this happening? And OpenTelemetry is what makes that happen. Now, OpenTelemetry, or OTel for short, is an open source, vendor-neutral framework for instrumenting, generating, collecting, and exporting telemetry data. Now, the great thing about OpenTelemetry is that it has the backing of all of the major observability vendors, making it the de facto standard for instrumenting applications. So in a nutshell, OpenTelemetry is here to stay. And I would like to say as well that I work in the OpenTelemetry space, and I work with different vendors who are contributing to OpenTelemetry like on a daily basis. And I love the fact that we can basically, like, we're not shit talking each other. We're just all collaborating together because we want to make OpenTelemetry awesome. So this is like a really nice, warm, collaborative environment. So we've got the observability and OpenTelemetry stuff taken care of. So now we can move on to our final definition, which is service level objectives, or SLOs. But before we can talk about SLOs, we need to talk about SLIs, or service level indicators. And I promise you'll see why in a sec. So service level indicator, or SLI, is nothing more than a metric. That is, it's a thing you measure, and more specifically, it's a two-dimensional metric that answers the question, what should I be measuring and observing? Now, examples of SLIs include the number of good events over the total number of events, so success rate. Another example is number of requests completed successfully in 100 milliseconds over total number of requests. And it's important because we need SLIs for, if you guessed it, SLOs, or service level objectives. You are correct. So SLOs are informed by SLIs, which is basically just a super fancy way of saying that SLIs are the building blocks of SLOs. So SLOs help answer the question, what is the reliability goal of this service? So if we go back to our SLIs from earlier, we have our number of good events over total number of events, i.e. our success rate. That's our SLI. Our SLO says we would like 95% of those to be successful. So that's our SLO, our target. If we look at our other SLI, number of requests completed successfully in 100 milliseconds over total number of requests, our SLO would be, well, we would like 98% of those requests completed successfully in 100 milliseconds out of our total requests. So now that we are well-versed in observability, OpenTelemetry, service level objectives, let's get into our anti-patterns, or as I like to call them, high crimes against observability. So let's start with high crime number one. Traces not treated as first-class citizens. Now, too many organizations put far too much emphasis on metrics and logs while either completely disregarding or downplaying traces. And, you know, I'm not here to poo-poo metrics and metrics and logs. They are useful, but they are simply not enough. Now, metrics give us information about things like CPU levels and the amount of time that it takes to complete a transaction, but they can only provide aggregate information that you can't drill down into to understand what's going on with your system. And logs provide us very useful point in time information. However, by themselves, logs make it pretty damn difficult to troubleshoot because they don't give you the big picture. Like imagine scrolling through a massive log file. Okay, you see like, what happened at particular points in time, but you're like, okay, in the context of what else was going on in the midst of all this? And the thing is that neither metrics nor logs give you enough context to understand what's happening with your system at a high level. And so the biggest crime against observability is committed when metrics and logs are treated as the main actors of your observability story, when in fact, they take more of a supporting role, an important role, but still supporting. And spoiler alert, traces are the true stars of the show. So how do we fix this? Well, we take a trace-first approach. Now, traces give you that end-to-end system-wide view. They show you not only what's going on within services, but also across services. And so you might be wondering, well, where do metrics and logs fit into all this? Well, where possible, we would like to make logs more useful by making them a part of the overall story, i.e. by correlating them to our traces. So our traces show, what happens in each operation, each microservice call. So this service calls this service, and this service calls this service, and they're all part of like an overarching service. And the logs then tell us, okay, well, this particular call, for example, returned a value of X. And this other call returned a value of Y. So now we're starting to paint a big picture. Now, similarly, where possible, let's make metrics more useful by correlating them to traces. So now we have a fuller picture of what's happening, and we've got metrics and logs funneling additional information into our traces in order to make that happen. All right, so now let's look at high crime number 2, the wall O dashboards. Now, this one is nails on chalkboard to me because I actually worked at a place once where leadership thought that their production woes would be solved by dashboarding all the things. The narrative was, well, I helped set up a wall of dashboards when I worked at XYZ company and it helped us so much. And I'm like, okay, well, listen, buddy, just because something worked for you like 10 to 15 years ago when systems were a lot simpler and observability as it now exists wasn't really a thing, doesn't mean we should continue doing things that way. It is time to get with the times and rethink that wall of dashboards. And I mean, I still think back to like my old bank days when I was walking through the area where the prod support guys sat, and there was like literally like a wall of like big ass monitors showing system state. Like, ugh. So now, does that mean that dashboards go away entirely? No. We should instead rethink our dashboard situation. So it is use fewer dashboards. Don't rely on the wall O dashboards to guide your observability journey. A better alternative would be to create dashboards from service level objectives or SLOs. Haha, they come into play after all. And SLOs are actionable values. Now, as an aside, I gave a very high level definition of SLOs and SLIs. There's actually a wonderful book by Alex Hidalgo on SLOs, and I'll include a link to that at the end of this presentation. Definitely recommend that you read it. Now, so back to our SLOs. So for example, suppose you have an SLO that states that the response time for service X must be 95% of the time. So it's got to be 95% responsive. Well, if the service isn't meeting that SLO, then it should trigger an alert to notify by Slack, phone, pager, passenger pigeon, or whatever to tell your on-call engineers that your system is not behaving within the expected parameters and that you've got to take a closer look at things, which is way, way better than staring at a bunch of dashboards, don't you think? All right, high crime number 3, engineers not instrumenting their own code. Now, another story from another organization. So I worked at a place where I ran an observability practices team, and our mission was to establish and disseminate observability practices across the org. So we wanted them to do observability the right way. And part of that involved us teaching teams how to instrument their code with our good friend, OpenTelemetry. Now, while leadership was all in on the whole idea of OpenTelemetry, and that was a bit of a sell as well, they wanted my engineers to instrument code that they weren't even working on. Now, you might be wondering, what is wrong with this picture? Well, for starters, my engineers did not write the code. The dev team did. So like, it would be super duper weird to have someone comment your code and write your unit tests for you. So why wouldn't it be okay all of a sudden to have somebody instrument your code? I mean, how do you expect them to know what is worth instrumenting? Now, here's the thing. The thought of instrumenting existing code with OpenTelemetry can be freaking overwhelming. Like, having to comb through existing code that probably hasn't been looked at since the Stone Age is kind of scary. It also means having to figure out this OpenTelemetry thing, right? If you're instrumenting your code for the first time, which, if it's new to you, can be downright scary. But I'm here to say, like, don't despair. You don't have to deal with everything all at once. You can break things down. So first of all, recognize the fact that you may need to put some features on hold in order to instrument your code. It is a bit of a tall order in some organizations, but like, if your house is on fire, that's your code screaming, instrument me. Secondly, try to knock off the quick wins. And to do that, identify like the high touch areas in your code that you need to instrument and do it. And then finally get in the habit of instrumenting any new code as you write it, so that you don't end up having to chase down that technical debt of having to instrument the code once it's been deployed to prod, because like, let's face it, it'll either not get done or get done poorly. Now, as a rule of thumb, you want to focus on instrumenting your homegrown frameworks and libraries, as that will give you all of the coverage that you need as far as tracing is concerned. Moral of the story: if you're a leader, foster a culture of engineers instrumenting their own damn code. If you're an individual contributor, instrument your own damn code. Now, I will leave you with this awesome clip from the awesome Liz Fong-Jones from when she was a guest on my On Call Me Maybe podcast, which I think sums it up perfectly. Hopefully the audio comes through.
Great, full grown-up software engineer, write your own damn tests, right? Like, so write your own damn comments, write your own damn observability annotations, right? Like, this is what will help you understand your code later. Someone else writing it for you achieves like very little of the value.
Well said, Liz. All right, high crime number 4, belief that observability and observability tooling are the same thing. Now, my friends, this could not be further from the truth. Observability is a set of practices supported by tools. And does that sound a little bit familiar to you? Because it's the sound of the DevOps movement from a few years ago, which, you know what, is still very true. Practices over tools. Now, you might be wondering, okay, what are good observability practices? Well, they include things like instrumenting your code properly so that you have enough information to troubleshoot when the issues arise, thereby avoiding calling the same group of experts to troubleshoot. It means treating your traces as first-class citizens. It means keeping an eye on the health of your system after you release your code to production. What a novel concept. You release your code to prod and you check your observability backend to make sure, hey, is this thing working properly? Don't walk away and pray that it'll work. And of course, creating meaningful alerts based on service level objectives. And you put all that into place and you've got yourself some lovely observability. And finally, takes us to high crime number 5, which I like to call observability theater. Now, we've seen it before, companies going on all in on so-called digital transformations, which of course includes going agile and creating a DevOps practice. And these are all extremely noble causes, and I fully support these initiatives. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. And, you know, the intentions are generally good, but in reality, sometimes, you know, these things get blocked by a group of people who either never believed that it would work or never wanted it to work in the first place. And I know because been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Now, in short, it means it was all theater. Now, I've seen this in observability too, where someone's like, hey, we need observability. And I'm all like, yeah, this is awesome. But then it turns out to be a front for Lando logs and Wall-O-Metrics dashboards, because that's what folks grew up with. That's what they're comfortable with. And quite frankly, that's all they want to know. So if you're an executive, I beg of you to open your mind to the paradigm shift of observability. If you've been around the block on these types of big initiatives before, as I have, you know that change can't and won't happen without buy-in from the executive level. But we also know that change cannot happen without buy-in from the folks who are doing the work, the individual contributors. So you need that kind of enthusiasm as well. So in short, be a part of the positive change. Now, like all worthwhile things, achieving observability greatness isn't an overnight thing, but if you keep the following things in mind, they will help guide you in your observability journey. First, make your traces first-class citizens in your observability landscape. Secondly, say bye to the Wallo dashboards and hello to our alert-based SLOs. Let's encourage developers to instrument their own code. Think of Liz Fong Jones. Treat your observability as a set of practices supported by tools. Sort your practices out before reaching out for the shiny new thing, tempting. And finally, just say no to observability theater. And there you have it. I know it's been a lot to take in, and if you follow any of my blog posts on Medium, I do like to reward my blog readers' patience with cute pictures of my pet rats, which is what I'll do right now. This is my pet rat Phoebe, named after the Friends character, and she likes to burrow in things, as you can see. Thank you very much for sticking around and spending part of your evening with me. Be sure to check out the various resources that I've posted on here. Take a screen grab of this page and scan the QR codes. They include links to the blog posts that inspired this talk. I have a whole blog series called Unpacking Observability on Medium. I don't even know how many blog posts. It's made up of lots over the last couple of years. There are also a couple of really great O'Reilly books on the topic, including the one on service level objectives by Alex Hidalgo, who is also on my On Call Me Maybe podcast, a really great episode on SLOs. And of course, OpenTelemetry, which is the project that I am part of. Highly recommend that you check these out. Also, a big shout out to Dolly for helping me create all these awesome capybara images, because I certainly don't have the artistic talent to be able to come up with those drawings. So yay AI. And if you have any questions or would like to talk to me about any of the topics that I covered today, hit me up on all the socials and give the On Call Me Maybe podcast a listen. Until next time, peace, love, and code.
Well done. Thanks, Adriana. That's great. I think my interest in OpenTelemetry, and I want to open it up to the floor. So if you've got a question, feel free to toss a hand up or throw something in the chat, and I'll make sure that we get to you. I've got a question. So I've seen OpenTelemetry before, and it's been on my radar for quite some time. But what I focus on is value streams, on workflow. And I wonder from, your perspective as an expert, I don't get to talk to experts on OpenTelemetry very often. And so what do you think about the context of observability in workflow? So, the classic use cases that I'm aware of for observability are, code running in production, right? Code deployed on systems. Do you think that there is an opportunity to look at workflow activity in the software development lifecycle and use something like OpenTelemetry, or would that just be that use case is just too far away from?
Think it's doable. Yeah, because I mean, like, I know that one of the use cases for OpenTelemetry that came out, I guess, after, observability started being a thing was like adding observability to CI/CD pipelines, right? So where the hell things are breaking, right? When they break. And my take is like, if you can automate a workflow, I think it's fair game to be able to observe it, right? I think there's a place for OpenTelemetry there.
I think, I definitely see the use case for CI/CD. I think the challenge would be, a lot of workflows happening in systems like Jira, Slack, and ServiceNow, right? And Salesforce, and these places that don't, I can't see them playing nice with something like OpenTelemetry, but I do think it is possible.
Yeah,
it's interesting to think about whether you could just plug it into webhooks or other signals that are coming out of those systems.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking along those lines too. Like, unless they have like native OpenTelemetry integration, that's probably what you're going to end up having to do. But there's probably still value in that, right? Because it gives you that extra little bit of visibility.
And so let's say somebody is interested in playing around with this and they've got maybe some kind of a static data store. So they have maybe a database with time series data that they'd like to look at in the context of OpenTelemetry. Is that a use case, or is this for strictly real-time data?
I'm not sure I quite understand the nature of the question.
I'm wondering if if you had something, let's say it was tough to integrate with, but you were able to get the data out into a database or a data store. Is it possible to use OpenTelemetry to analyze data like that and get some visualization?
I'm thinking like you could probably use OpenTelemetry to look at the values coming out of the data store and like writing some validations around that. Like, a really cool use case for OpenTelemetry is this thing called trace-based testing, where you're basically leveraging your OpenTelemetry traces to create assertions. So I could see something like that as being extremely useful, for example.
Mm-hmm. What is the weirdest use case that you've seen for OpenTelemetry?
No. I guess the weirdest, and I'm hoping it'll be less weird, is the idea of trace-based testing, because it's still a fairly new concept. Like there are a few companies out there that provide that capability. Like, the idea came out from one of OTel's co-founders, Ted Young. He talked about trace-based testing in like 2018 at KubeCon North America. And so like at the time, I don't even think like OpenTelemetry was a thing. So there wasn't that standardization, but it was kind of like the speculative, like, what if we could do this? And then in the last like year or so, there have been companies like Trace-Test, Helios, and then there's a product called Malaby, which I think is made by Aspecto. And they are implementations of trace-based testing. And I would say that would be the weirdest use case, because it's not necessarily something that where you would think, I can use OpenTelemetry for that. And I feel like there's like some momentum growing towards that. And I think it'd be really cool because it puts like, it puts observability in the hands of like so many more people. It puts observability in the hands of quality assurance engineers, an area where you wouldn't even expect like observability to be a thing, because now they can like create these integration tests using OpenTelemetry traces, and also then it helps them to troubleshoot things in the systems that they're testing. So now they can go back to developers and say, I found a bug and I know where it is. And so it's helping to achieve better observability, because observability is the idea of like, you've instrumented your code well enough that you have the information to figure out what's happening. And if you as a quality assurance engineer do not know like why this is happening, then it identifies a gap also in the instrumentation. So it's like this really cool feedback loop.
That is really cool. I can think about a number of different ways that I'd want that kind of plugged in just to ensure that, you know, this whole aspect of performance is covered by your test suite. I don't see any other questions. I love the idea of letting you off the hook and letting everybody get to their families and dinners and everything else that they've got to go to. So if there's no other questions, in the meantime, what I'm going to do is, first of all, thank you for speaking and sharing. I got a lot out of this. I thought this was an excellent presentation. And I want to let everybody know about next month, which is coming up soon. So we're going to be talking about security. We bounce around a lot. So next month is going to be a presentation on security. Hopefully everyone can join us. And in the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful month, and you all enjoy the spring.
Oh, can I just make a quick comment to whoever posted in the chat about like app sites having like a telemetry based like instrumentation agent?
100%.
Telemetry also has auto instrumentation for .NET, Java, Python, Node.js. So that type of thing totally exists, and it's vendor agnostic. So I would see that as an advantage over any vendor specific thing that's out there. So I just want to put that out there.
Awesome. I love that. I love vendor agnostic options. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.